grab a Bible, open it up to Genesis chapter 10. Genesis chapter 10 is where we are this morning. We're moving our way through the book of Genesis, a little bit at the time, except for today. We're going to move through the book of Genesis a lot at the time because we're going to do chapter 10 and chapter 11. So you guys listen fast and I'll talk fast. Deal? Here we go. All right, so let's catch up. The best way, I think, to set the tone, because what's going to happen is the whole book of Genesis is getting ready to really change pretty dramatically, because we're going to go from talking about the whole world to talking about one family for pretty much the rest of the book. And so what's happened up to this point? Genesis begins with God speaking into existence a good creation, where he ultimately created man to bear his image and serve as stewards over that good creation, but man rebelled and failed in the garden because of the terrible decision to be like God when he was already like God, right? So man fell, their nakedness was exposed, and then God covered their nakedness and cast them from the garden to move eastward. After this, the first children of Adam and Eve show the terrible effects of the fall as Cain kills Abel, right? People carry on in the world, begin to subdue it through the discovery of technology, but sinfulness continues to abound, culminating in the evil sons of God that we read about in Genesis, who violate God's law and take matters into their own hands. God finally, ultimately cleanses the world with a flood and preserves one family, and that is the family of Noah. God makes a covenant to extend common grace to all people, but Noah fails just like Adam in a garden, right? He fails because he drank too much wine. He lay naked in his tent uncovered, failed in a garden, nakedness exposed, and his brothers come to cover his nakedness. This story that we're talking about today everything has been set to there. Failure, right? God gives a good thing. He gives a great thing in the universe, the creation of the universe. He speaks a good universe into creation. Man fails. God restores. Man fails. God restores. And we're seeing this pattern happen over and over again. And you're supposed to get to this point and go, man, is there any hope that anything different could happen? And the answer that we're going to read in Genesis 12 is yes, but not yet. It's got to come according to God's promises. But we're going to read in 10 and 11 this idea that all what we'll see is that humanity has a lot of things in common and almost none of them are good. Right? And we're going to see this commentary on all of humanity in Genesis chapter 10 and Genesis chapter 11. So go ahead and open your Bibles there. Leave them open, because what we're going to do today, since we have so much to read, is we're going to read as we move through the points. And so we're not going to read it at the beginning. We're going to read all the way through, because we're covering 2 chapters worth of material. So as we pray, we're going to pray together, and then we're going to start in chapter 10. So let's pray. Father, we pray that your word would be spoken clearly this morning. We pray that we would know more of you because we have encountered your word. Lord, I pray that you would help us to be exposed by it. Show us the nature, not just of our sinfulness, but of your great mercy and grace to forgive us of our sins when we confess them. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So the first thing in chapter 10 I want us to see, all humanity has in common, the same ancestry. We all come from Adam, but more specifically, we all also come from Noah, because there wasn't anybody left. So we had to all come from somebody. And Genesis 10 is going to make that connection for us in a couple of different ways. So let's read Genesis 10 together. These are the generations of the sons of Noah: Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth. Here we go. Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer: Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan: Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these, the coastland peoples spread in their lands, each with his own language, by their clans, in their nations. The sons of Ham: Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush: Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Raamah, and Sabtakah. The sons of Raamah: Sheba and Dedan. Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on the earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. From that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh. Rehoboth-ir, Calah, We're saying between Nineveh and Calah. That is the great city. Egypt, farther to Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim, Casluhim, from whom the Philistines came, and Caphtorim. Okay, you guys ready? Let's keep going. Here we go. Canaan, father of Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Archites, and the Sinites, the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Afterwards, the clans of the Canaanites dispersed. And the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza, and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham, by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. To Shem also, the father of all the children of Aber, the elder brother of Japheth, so children were born. The sons of Shem, Elam, Ashur, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. Sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arpachshad fathered Shelah, and Shelah fathered Aber. To Aber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan fathered Almadad, Shalef, Hazmarveth, Jerah, Hadaram, Uzal, Diklah, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. Jobab, that's the one name we can relate to. All these were the sons of Joktan. The territory in which they live extended from Mesha in the direction of Sephar to the hill country of the east. These are the sons of Shem, by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. These are the clans of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, in their nations, and from these nations spread abroad on the earth, all after the flood. Okay, so this is one of those chapters that never makes a coffee cup or like a really inspirational calendar, right? Like you just don't read these verses and just get great inspiration. And so it makes us ask the question, and this is now, I sat down and looked at it, this is now the fourth time I've preached one of the genealogies of the Bible, right? And so I must be a glutton for punishment. But we ask ourselves, why? What's the purpose of a list of names, or a table of nations is generally what this is called. One of the things is that we see God gives a command in the garden that he gives again to Noah, which is to be fruitful and multiply, right? So guess what they're doing? They're being fruitful and they're multiplying. This promise that God has given that humanity is going to cover the face of the earth, it's happening, but this is a different type of genealogy. It's not like the one we had earlier in Genesis, right? Number one is it's not exhaustive. It is not intended to trace every father and every son of every person that came from these three sons and covered the face of the earth. That would make the Bible at least 100 times bigger than it currently is, because it's literally telling you where everyone in the earth came from, right? So it's giving you some of those names that are representative, especially of the nations that were fathered by the three sons of Noah. We have different peoples here. I wish, okay, so it's fascinating to look at this and look at the geography and to see where everybody ends. But when you look at this genealogy, they're literally tracing people from as far west as Spain all the way down to Africa and over. So the entire known world is what's happening. Moses is recounting, here's where the whole world came from. And so he's literally going through all of these things. Now, we talked last week about Japheth. I don't know if you remember this. The sons of Japheth. And the sons of Japheth ended up dwelling where the Gentile lands would be. And the promise that God made to Japheth was that what? One day the sons of Japheth would dwell in the tents of Shem. The tents of Shem. From Shem come the Semites, come Abraham. One of these days come Jesus. All of this points to this idea that God is going to reconcile Jew and Gentile under the salvation given by Jesus Christ. So you see this happening. Everybody's spreading out. All these nations are going all over the place. But there's something else that's missing in this table of nations. Not one person in chapter 10 is called righteous. Not one person. The last time we read a genealogy, we read about a guy who walked with God and he was not, for God took him, right? So you've got a picture of someone who was righteous. You read about Noah, who was called in the Bible a righteous man. We could call Noah righteous because the Bible calls Noah righteous. Not this time. No righteous people in Genesis chapter 10. What's the point? The point is that the whole world, the effects of the curse, the effects of the sin, have so permeated the world at this time that it is full of wickedness. They were fruitful and they multiply, but we don't hear a lot about people in the whole. In fact, the only two people that it stops and talks about it all in chapter 10 is Nimrod, right? Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, many people have interpreted that to think that was like a compliment. Man, he is a mighty hunter before the Lord. But that little phrase, before the Lord, the best way to kind of think about how that is translated is it's like it's a guy who got in God's face. Seemed like a good idea to get in God's face. You guys know what I mean by that? It's not like before the Lord, like the Lord watched him and said, oh, he was great. It's before the Lord like he was affronting. He was insulting God by his actions. In fact, there's a lot of question about what he was hunting. It never says he was hunting animals, right? And so you've got from Nimrod, which would have made perfect sense to the Israelites. They would have heard this story, and then they would have heard about this guy who starts this city called Nineveh. And if you read it again, you think about the backstory, right? A couple of these places sound very familiar to us because we're going to read about them again in the Bible, right? So Nimrod, you get this stopped, and it's like, wow, this guy, clearly it doesn't seem like he's done good. He's in the face of God, if you will. He's offensive to God. And then Peleg, and the whole earth is divided. And you're supposed to stop and go, wait, what? How did the earth get divided? Well, that's what Genesis 11 is doing. So Genesis 10 is setting you up with how the whole world has been filled by the sons of Noah. And then you get this stop and this talk about the world being divided. And then Genesis 11 is going to explain how all that happened. Because you'll read that they were divided up by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. And so that leads to a question. How did all that come about? And that's where Genesis 11 comes into play. But if we're going to think about how to apply Genesis 10, the first one is this. All of us share Adam as father and Noah as father. All of us come from the same person. The way you believe that to be true dramatically impacts your view of race and ethnicity. You believe that we all originated from the same person, then our cultures may have become different over the course of many years. But the primary foundational thing that unites us is that we were all born from Adam, all born from Noah. Right? And so this commonality that we share ought to impact the way we treat one another. Culture is different, ethnicity may be different, but in the end, we're all united in our ancestry. We all come from the same source. That's going to be extremely important as we move on. The next thing we see, though, is that we all have the same accountability. So chapter 11, we're going to slow down in 11 verses 1 through 9, because that's the story of the Tower of Babel. And many of you have heard this story, but this is extremely important as we're moving forward in the Bible. So let's look at this, the same accountability. Chapter 11, starting in verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as the people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Now, if you're reading this, you want to stop for a second and ask yourself, what exactly was their commission? Their commission was to actually be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Just keep that in mind, right? So they're building something to keep from doing what God has called them to do. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do now will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language so that it may not be understood, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. Okay, so first, when we look at this, look at the motivations why they built a tower are important. There are several things that happen here. First, okay, let's start with this. They migrated from the east. You guys remember? When the people left the garden, which way did they go? When Adam and Eve left the garden, they went east. All right, east is a picture for us of not good. All right, they're going east. They're migrating. They're filling the earth. They're going east, and they find this plain, and it's a good spot, and they say, I'm going to stop here. They got about 80% through of doing what God had actually called them to do. 80% obedience is not actual obedience, though, right? So they get out, they get most of the way out, and they go, oh, this looks pretty good. I'm going to stop here and camp out. This must be what God wants me to do. It's incredibly convenient. There's this great plain, and we can make bricks, and we'll build a big tower. And so they come up with this idea to stop going and doing what God has called them to go and do. Now, I know none of us ever do that. None of us ever do 80% righteousness, right? We never get most of the way through doing something that we're intending to do, and then we just stop. But that's what they did. So it's important to study that. So if we ever know anybody that does that, we can encourage them. All right? So when they do that, the way they do it first is this: let us. Look at this. Come, let us make bricks. Now, the last time we read in the Bible, anyone who's using that plural, let us, it's God who's talking about how to create. He's speaking as a Trinity. And so there's this affront. Again, you read this offense. Let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. And it doesn't really have the same effect on us as it does the Israelites. Brick baking is not a thing most of us engage in on a daily basis. But the reality is it wasn't something that the Israelites engaged in on a daily basis either, because brick baking was expensive. It required a massive amount of resources and time and effort, and it was costly. And so you're reading this story about these people using lavish amounts of resources to intentionally offend God. Literally, using their resources in a way that is intentionally offensive. Right? They're trying to decide how to do this. They've become comfortable financially, and so they establish a city. You know, Jesus tells a story about this, right? About a guy who becomes very self-satisfied and decides that the best thing that he needs to do is what? Build bigger barns. And what happens? What's he told? You fool, tonight your life will be required of you. Right? The Bible is full of stories of people who became self-satisfied and contented with material possessions and rejected the call and command of God. Right? And that is literally what's the first thing that we can see that's happening in Babel, is that they're self-satisfied. Let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. Right? We can make bricks and mortar. Look at what we can do. We have the ability and the technology to be able to build this thing for ourselves. So boy, let's do it. Friends, we live in a culture that has whole cities dedicated to the use of resources to offend God. And so we aren't far from this. But the other thing they say in verse 4, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, that we may make a name for ourselves. They want to be in total control of their own destiny. We have this technology, we can do this. Let's reach up instead of moving out. Isn't it interesting? God told them to scatter, to go outward. And instead of being obedient to the call of God to scatter over the face of the earth, they decided to go up into heaven and dethrone God. That was the attempt of Babel. But here's the real big problem. All those things, I've heard a lot of people talk about Babel, and the big issue is pride. The big issue is, using what I've just said. All those things are definitely in play. But the real big issue with Babel was they distorted worship. They actually tried to change who God was. So check this out. All right, so I always had in my mind a picture of the Tower of Babel. Let's see if it works on time. It looked like this. Now, some of you are going to say, that is the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I know that is the Leaning Tower of Pisa. But this tall, skinny thing that went real high, that was kind of literally, for many, many years, that was my idea of what the Tower of Babel looked like. Actually, the Tower of Babel would look more like this. A ziggurat. All right, so most of you say, well, that's not a tower at all. I know, they call it a tower because that was a tower then, right? Here's the thing. The Tower of Babel most likely would have looked like this. It was a stairway to heaven. We'll leave that alone. It was a stairway to heaven. All right, the intention was to build enough stairs and to build a tall enough structure that people could go up and build this place where God could come down. They put a little cot up there, and they had like a fruit basket. No kidding, truly, that's what they did. They built this thing, and they built this whole little space so that when God came down from heaven, if he got tired, he could take a nap, he'd have some fruit, and then he could come down, and then they would be blessed by the fact that he came down. Now, is that what the God of the Bible's like? No! Right? So you understand the real big mistake that they made at the Tower of Babel? They were trying to reinvent God in their image. That's the real big mistake that they made. They were trying to manipulate God by building a tower so that he might go up, so that he might come down, see that, take a break, come down, and then bless them in their disobedience. That's what they were after. They've totally distorted what worship is. The heart of the problem is not an abuse of resources or even prideful ambition. It's misplaced worship. They were worshiping wrongly. They distorted the picture of who God is. And we read about this in the Bible in several places, right? Psalm 50 is one of my favorite go-tos. You could jot that down if you want to, or you could try to run over there real fast if your Bible drill is sharp. Psalm 50. Man, oh man, this one just lays it out. Okay. Psalm 50, here we go. The mighty one, God of the Lord, speaks and summons the earth. From the rising of the sun to its setting, out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God shines forth. Our God comes. He does not keep silence. Before him is a devouring fire. Around him a mighty tempest. He calls to the heavens above and to the earth that he may judge his people. Gather to me my faithful ones who made a covenant with me by sacrifice. The heavens declare his righteousness, for God himself is judge. Hear, O my people, and I will speak. O Israel, I will testify against you. I am God, your God. Not for your sacrifices do I rebuke you. Your burnt offerings are continually before me. I will not accept a bull from your house or goats from your folds, for every beast of the forest is mine. The cattle on 1,000 hills. That's where we know that passage, right? Now we're like, oh, that psalm. Yeah, that psalm. I know all the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you. What does that do to the little fruit basket on the top of the Tower of Babel, right? I was hungry. Now, does God get hungry? Totally a rhetorical device. No, he does not get hungry. But if he did, you would not be the person he'd be asking for food, right? That's the point, right? For the world and its fullness are mine. Do I eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats? Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving and perform your vows to the Most High and call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you and you shall glorify me. But to the wicked, God says, what right have you to recite my statutes or take my covenant on your lips? For you hate discipline, and you cast my words behind you. If you see a thief, you are pleased with him, and you keep company with adulterers. You give your mouth free rein for evil, and your tongue frames deceit. You sit and speak against your brother and slander your own mother's son. Now listen to this. This is the crux of the whole thing right here. These things you have done, and I have been silent. You thought that I was one like yourself. But now I rebuke you and lay the charge before you. Mark this then, you who forget God, lest I tear you apart, and there be none to deliver. The one who offers thanksgiving as his sacrifice glorifies me. The one who orders his way rightly, I will show the salvation of God. You feel the weight of the holiness of God in that psalm? That's what they didn't feel when they decided to make for themselves a name and build a tower that reached into heaven. They changed who God was. Friends, there are so many false prophets, so rapidly and quickly engaging in changing the very nature of who God is that it ought to make us sick. Because this God, the God that we read about in this Bible, he doesn't need a cot to sleep on or a fruit basket. In fact, he doesn't need you or me or anything. He's the only self-sufficient, self-existent being in the universe. The mistake they made was trying to create a God in their image. Now, this would seem just totally out of left field for us, except for the fact that we do it all the time. One of the crippling phrases that we use in the Christian life as a whole is something that goes like this. I will tell you something about the Bible, or I'll tell you something that I think about God, and you'll say, well, I like to think of God as. It doesn't matter how you like to think of God as. It matters how he's revealed himself in his word. It matters who he has revealed himself to be. Your opinion about God is completely irrelevant except for the sake of your own soul. or if you decide to become a teacher, which is where James says, let not many of you become teachers, brothers, knowing that as such you will incur a stricter judgment. Right? But our opinions about God are so often our attempts to distort and twist who God actually is so that we can make a God that we could tame and control. To make a God that will somehow accommodate our needs or our wants or our desires instead of being the God that he has revealed himself to be. And that was the great mistake of Babel, and that is the great mistake of the American church. When we come to worship on Sunday expecting that we might simply receive and simply be entertained, we are creating and fabricating a God in our own image, and he will not be mocked. That's the problem with Babel. We distort worship. And here's the other problem. God always sees. Now, here's the irony about this. All right, check this out. So what they want to do is build for themselves a city and a tower that's top of the heavens. Let's make a name for ourselves so we don't get dispersed over the face of the whole earth. This tower is a stairway to heaven where God could come down, right, and rest. And listen what happens. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower. You get that picture, right? See what's happening? They built something so that God might come down and see what's going on and bless them, and he came down all right. But he did the exact opposite. He dispersed them over the face of the earth. Now, you know what's fascinating about this? The all-seeing eye of God never fails to see the inner workings of a man's heart. It does not matter who you tell other people that you are, if who you tell other people that you are is not who you actually are, because God sees it. We can put on faces for only so long. We can only act certain ways for only so long. And I am very easily fooled. It is possible that you fool me. This is why we talk so much about integrity. Who you are when you're not here, who you are when no one is seeing you, far more of an indicator of what you actually believe than the way you act when you come to church on Sunday morning. That's why we say, you show me two things. Show me your checkbook and your calendar, and I will tell you who your God is. Show me those things, I will tell you who you worship, because those things are a revelation of what's actually important to you and what you think of the God of the universe, by the way, that has revealed himself to you. So God will see, and so God judges. Now, the interesting thing is that God's judgment here is actually very gracious. He sees there's nothing that's going to be beyond them. If they're going to do this, what will they do next? And so he scatters them. He keeps them separated, right? It's like when you were in school. Maybe you were the kid. I sometimes was the kid, often kid, who got the other kid in trouble by talking the whole time. That's probably a shock to you. I like to talk a lot. Right? I liked to talk a lot even when people told me I couldn't talk a lot. And so I talked. And so what would end up happening is the teacher would say, I can't keep you two people together, so I'm going to have to what? Literally, it's like God talking to a bunch of school children. I can't keep you people together. You're going to have to scatter. Because everything you're doing at this point is not good for you. Isn't it fascinating how in this scenario, in this story of the Tower of Babel, when God confuses their languages and scatters them, it's for their good. God's judgment is actually working out for their good. The affliction that God puts in their life, actually working out for their good. Not a horribly popular message, but an awfully biblical one. That the things that God gives us in our lives that cause us the most pain will very often be the sources of the greatest blessing when we're with him and made like him and made perfect. Sometimes the consequences that we are reaping, this is even closer to home, sometimes the consequences that we are reaping of our own dumb, sinful decisions will prove themselves to be some of the greatest evidences of God's grace in our life. Because that's how he works. Because he has to treat us like school children. And so he does, because he loves us. So we see the judgment of God executed on Babel, but it is mercy. Now, the third thing we see that we all have in common. We all have the same solution to the problem. All right, so let's start chapter 11, verse 10. We're going to finish up. These are the generation of Shem. More names. You guys ready? Here we go. When Shem was 100 years old, He fathered Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he fathered Arpachshad 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arpachshad had lived 35 years, he fathered Shelah. And Arpachshad lived after he fathered Shelah 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he fathered Eber. And Shelah lived after he fathered Eber 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he fathered Peleg. And Eber lived after he fathered Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters. This would be a good responsive reading. When Peleg had lived 30 years, he fathered Reu. And Peleg lived after he fathered Reu 209 years, and he had... That's pretty good. We're going to get it in just a few verses. When Reu lived 32 years, he fathered Serug. And Reu lived after he fathered Serug 207 years, and... When Serug had lived 30 years, he fathered Nahor, and Serug lived after he fathered Nahor 200 years and had... Good. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he fathered Terah. And Nahor lived after he fathered Terah 119 years and had sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now, these are the descendants of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred, Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren. She had no child. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarah his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now, we're getting ready, starting next week, to study the life of Abraham, right? And we're getting to where he came from. We're getting this picture. There are some really important things that this little section of chapter 11 are teaching us, right? So we've got this picture. Noah's sons have more sons. The nations are the result. The language is distorted. And we read each generation seeming to forget more and more of who God is. The result is a bunch of pagans who built a pagan stairway to try to manipulate God. You know who one of those pagans is? Abraham. Like, we don't think about Abraham prior to God speaking to him. But prior to God speaking to him, Abraham was one of these people that said, come, let us make a name for ourselves. Isn't that fascinating? Right? It tells us a picture about God's saving work in our lives. Easy to miss. That's why these lists are so important. You get a picture of where people came from. Sometimes the best way to get to know somebody is to start out by asking them where they came from. And so we're reading about where Abraham came from. Isn't that interesting? It seems like God's plan is in danger here, right? Genesis 3, God makes the plan for the snake crusher to come. He's going to come and crush the head of the serpent. Noah's preserved, right? God is gracious to preserve him, makes a promise that he'll never destroy the world this way again. Shem is going to dwell in the house of the Lord, and Japheth's going to dwell in the tents of Shem. And now you're 2 chapters into this thing, multiple generations later. Nobody knows who God is. They're building a stairway to heaven, and you're all going, what's happening? How in the world is God going? How is God working in this? Is the question that we ought to be asking. Didn't he make a promise? Yes, he did make a promise. And he's going to use a particular person in here. Now, it's fascinating. The end of this chapter steps in. We start at Genesis 12. I'm going to give away a little of my sermon next week. Look at Genesis 12, verse 1. Now, the Lord said to Abram, that's where it starts, right? It's not Abram woke up one day and got smart, right? It's not Abram decided to come to his senses and realize that pagan worship is wrong. No. It is the Lord said to Abram. God intervenes in the life of this person. God steps in and rescues this guy and then makes promises to him that his generations will be like the stars in the sky and the sands on the shore. And we know from all of that we've received the promise of Christ. Verse 27 starts narrowing down the lens for us in chapter 11. So we read about these sons of Terah, one of whom is Abram. And the most mind-bending part of chapter 11 is most likely Abram was a pagan who would have worshipped at the Tower of Babel. The way the timeline works out as we read through Genesis, Abram and his family were steeped in this pagan worship of the day. Most of the people in that day would have looked at the sky and worshiped the moon and seen it as some variety of God. They would have been looking up and seeing the stars and thinking of each individual star as a deity. Now, put in your mind the God that made the stars speaking to Abram and said, see these things that you used to worship? Those are not gods. I am God. And one day your generations will be greater than all of those. When you can number those, you can number what your children will be like. To a man who lived his whole life with his wife, unable to have children. That's why we can really commend the faith of Abraham. That's some radical faith right there. Everything seems incredibly unlikely to be true. And yet Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. What a cool place to end this story, right? Like you get this little glimmer of hope at the end. We see God doing the choosing. God chose Abraham. God set him apart, but it took time. God's plan takes time. That's one of the great things about reading the Old Testament. It's almost never, there are some instances where this is absolutely not the case. Almost never do you read about these saints in the Old Testament that God says, I'm going to do this for you, and then immediately it happens. Like almost always, it's God makes a promise, and then they just they start meandering through life while God is accomplishing his purposes. And all along you're supposed to be like, man, this has taken a long time. But God is never slow. But his plan takes time. Probably a helpful word for us, isn't it? Like you're in the middle of just waiting for God to do something. We've been praying for something. I think the hardest ones are the ones that we've been praying for a long time, right? Things that we've just been begging God to do. It doesn't matter what that is. It could be the alleviation of physical pain or sickness. It could be the salvation of a loved one. For some of us, for us and our family, it was the birth of one child. The waiting, the day after day after day after day, praying and begging and waiting and wondering when is God going to act. Friends, here's the good news. He is acting. The song, Sovereign Over Us, it's like my very favorite line in the whole thing. You're working in our waiting. You're sanctifying us. God is good and gracious to us to make us wait. But his promises will come about. And we rest in the goodness of those promises. The fact that his plan takes time. And we're going to talk about this one a lot as we go through Abraham. The fact that God does use individuals to accomplish his purposes. You know, I've said often, and you guys have said it with me, that God could just as easily use a rock as he could me. In fact, he might have a better time using a rock in many cases, right? Because the rock doesn't talk back. But at the end of the day, he didn't choose to use rocks. You know what he chose to use? Us to accomplish his purposes. His plan involves people. Not because he has to use people, but because he has chosen to. He's good and gracious to call people to salvation, to equip them for works of service, which he has prepared beforehand, then to set them off to accomplish his purposes while they're waiting. There's a waiting and working that happen together in the Christian life. Friends, we must be working and acting because we trust that God has called and equipped us to do so. But the thing that unites all of us, outside of having the same ancestry, being born from the same Adam, same Noah, outside of having the same accountability before God, that all of us are accountable before God, that's what Romans 1 teaches us. Apart from that, we see this, there's all the same solution. And in that, we need God to do the saving. We need God to save us. We need his activity in our lives, friends. We need him to change us, whether we would admit that or not. We read a chapter like this and we're reminded that we're not far from Babel. Still, we are united in our ancestry. Every person born that will be born has the same biblical grandparents, if you will. We are still united in our accountability. Each of us are accountable before God. Whether we want to be or not is irrelevant. We are accountable before God. We live under the judgment of God until something changes, right? But it can't just be us. We're like Abraham. We're just wandering around, completely oblivious to the fact that we've violated the law of God until he opens our eyes, until he shows us who he is, until we have that chapter 12, verse 1 moment where the Lord says to Scott, right? That's the moment I had to have. That's the moment you have to have. Any attempt we make to reach God will give us no relief. All the good efforts, the good deeds, the good works that we do in our whole life, when you put them together, will not buy you 2 minutes outside of hell. Doesn't matter how much righteousness you do. It's not enough. We must have God, and he must intervene on our behalf. We need the activity of God in our lives because in our lives, no amount of tower building will get us to God. We can't build a tower that reaches to heaven. There is no stairway to heaven that we can build. There is no way to get there. We couldn't get to God, but because God is gracious and merciful, you know what happened? God came to us. Isn't that something? He took human form to share common ancestry with his people as a son of Adam, but also son of God. He lived under the accountability of God, but instead of failing like we do, he lived a perfect life. He did the saving. He came and rescued us from the judgment of God. Friends, this story speaks to us about our desperate desire to create a God in our own image and our desperate need to be rescued by the God of the Bible. He came to us, and that changes everything. Would you pray with me?